I'm Katie Farrell with Dashing Dish, and at Dashing Dish, I'm all about teaching you how to create healthy alternatives to the food you crave. And speaking of food you crave, I think when most of us think of what am I craving, especially after a meal, what is the #1 thing that often comes to mind? I don't know about you, but I would say it's definitely chocolate. I'm always looking for something chocolate to have after a meal. So if you have a sweet tooth like I do, this is a great healthy option, and you can actually make them and put them in your freezer if you have trouble with portion control. That's what I like to do. I like to make a healthy baked good, put it in my freezer, and then just pull it, an individual serving out as I am hungry for it or craving it. So this is flourless fudgy iced brownies. So yes, you heard me correctly. This even has icing on it. So we're gonna start with the brownie mixture. We have some egg whites here. I just did a 1/4 cup of egg whites, but you could also just do 2 whole eggs. And I put that into the bowl. To this, I'm gonna add some peanut butter, but you could also do almond butter. Any kind of nut butter would work. And this is flourless, so there is absolutely no flour in this recipe at all. So the great thing is if you know somebody with, a gluten allergy, or you're just looking for ways to cut processed ingredients like white flour out of your diet completely, this is a great option. And then also we're gonna do pumpkin, which is kind of surprising, but you can't taste it at all. It really adds a lot of moisture to these brownies. So this is 1 cup of pumpkin. You can't taste it, like I said. So if you're thinking, well, that's strange, pumpkin inside of a brownie, you will never know what's in there. Then I have some baking stevia, and baking stevia is just a natural form of sweetener, and I do a 1/3 cup of baking stevia there. And then I'm gonna save just a few tablespoons to go into the icing. So we'll just leave a little bit in the bowl. So that's a 1/3 cup. And then I'm gonna add a 1/2 cup of cocoa powder. And I think a lot of times when people think chocolate, how can that be good for you? Well, actually, cocoa powder in itself is, it has no sweetener, so it's not bad for you in itself. It's when we add the sugar and the butter to it that it makes it unhealthy. So that's a really good way to get your chocolate in a healthy way. And then we're gonna do 1/2 cup of almond milk. And then just a teaspoon of baking powder. And then just a pinch of salt. And then we're gonna stir this up. And what I like to do when it comes to baked goods of any sort is just, find a really easy way to do it. So I usually just add everything to one bowl. I know that a lot of times, recipes say put the dry ingredients in one bowl, the wet in the other, but I like to keep it simple. So I just stir everything together in one bowl. It makes less of a cleanup. And then we're gonna add this to a baking pan. Once it's nice and creamy. Just like that. And you can see how this already looks just like a traditional brownie mixture. And I didn't add any oil, I didn't add any butter, any flour. And not that those ingredients are bad for you, but I like to say at Dashing Dish that clean eating is all about eating foods that are not man-made, not processed. So when we add things like white flour or white sugar to our recipes, those are heavily processed man-made foods. It's basically taking the whole grain and stripping it of all nutrients and bleaching it, and that's how we get white flour. With white sugar, it's the same thing. Sugar is actually brown if you have it in its natural source. So they process it, they bleach it, so it takes all the nutrition out. And so what we're looking for is really foods that are created by God to nourish our bodies. And this just helps our bodies function just as God created them to be. And you can see how smooth and creamy that looks. It almost makes you want to lick the bowl, just like a traditional brownie batter. So I sprayed this baking pan. I'm just gonna move it a little bit closer to me here. And I'm gonna just pour that right in. And these brownies are about 200 calories per serving, but that's excellent compared to the traditional brownie, which can have upwards of, 300 calories. But more importantly than even calories in this recipe is the fact that, like I said, there's nothing processed. It's foods that God designed for our bodies, so it helps nourish them. And then we also get a nice sweet treat as well. So we're gonna bake this for about 30 to 35 minutes in a 350-degree oven until it comes out clean. And so we're gonna make the frosting next, and I'm gonna show you just by frosting this pan of brownies. We have here 1/2 cup of nut butter, and I used peanut butter, but you can use any kind of nut butter that you like. And I'm gonna do a 1/4 cup of almond milk. Well, actually, let's save that to the end because I like to kind of see, you know, how is the frosting kind of coming together. And then at the very end, add the almond milk. And if it's too liquidy, then you can always, you know, add less. I'm gonna do a 1/4 cup of protein powder. And then 2 tablespoons of cocoa powder. And I did protein powder because that adds a little bit of protein to this recipe. There wasn't a whole lot that went into the brownies, so that's a nice protein pick-me-up in the frosting. So you can see I saved the almond milk to the end, and that way you can kind of alter it based on what you want your consistency to be. I'm gonna add the rest of this baking stevia. And you know, you can give it a little quick stir just before you whisk it, just to make sure, you know, things don't fly all over the kitchen. We'll see. And you see it's a little bit dry. So like I said, you can do a 1/4 cup, measure that off, and then add just a few tablespoons at a time, just as you would if you're making any traditional frosting. And you can see that's a good consistency. If you want it a little thinner, just add a little more almond milk. I like my frosting a little thicker, so. And you want it just to get to the point where it's just spreadable. Let's add the rest of that. I mean, I could definitely spread that, but I think making it a little thinner will make it a little easier to spread. Okay, and then we'll kind of get that off the beaters there. We'll frost the brownies that we already had baking. You can see this is the finished product here. And just smooth that on there. And you can always make it as thin or as thick as you like. So I'm going to continue frosting these brownies. And if you'd like this recipe or more just like it, you can head over to ctvn.org.